Can you tell us a little bit about what you did as a medical debt collector, and if you can share maybe like the medical debt collection companies that you worked with?
Yeah, so I didn't work for like junk debt buyers or third-party collectors like LVNB funding or Midland funding. Like I didn't do that. What I did was like first-party collections. So like I mentioned, I do a lot of like medical malpractice defense. So we've got a lot of doctors and clinics and nursing homes and dental offices that are clients, and they would obviously have bills that would go unpaid. Part of our services to them, we would do a lot of their collection efforts. So, we would sue on behalf of those companies and to get the medical bills paid. So I didn't work for like one company, but like through our firm, we would, whatever medical provider needed collection efforts done, we would do that for them.
Gotcha. So your law firm represented a variety of clients that were specifically healthcare providers or hospitals that were trying to collect on medical bills that were unpaid.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. And can you tell us a little bit more about like how debt collection law firms are structured and like how they work with the clients? Like how do the clients find them, and how does that work?
I mean, for us, it was, we were doing their other legal work, right? As you can imagine, like medical providers have a lot of legal issues to deal with. And so they would come to us and say, we've got these bills that are not being paid. Can you help us with that? And then we would help them with that as well. So ours was a little bit different than most collection law firms in that we were mainly doing this medical malpractice stuff, and then we would do some of the collection stuff for them. Most collection firms are going to be structured where, they've only got a handful of attorneys, maybe one or two attorneys, and a whole team of like paralegals and secretaries that are doing most of that work, with the attorneys only doing the work where they go to court. We were a little bit different in that way.
Because it sounds like the collection part was a little bit secondary, but you still did medical debt collection specifically.
Yeah, yep. Oh yeah, a lot of it.
So can you tell us what that was like making phone calls to consumers or people who owed medical debt, and what the conversation usually looked like or sounded like?
Yeah, so, for a lot of these, they would have like collection companies they would work with, right? And they'd send it to those collection companies, and the collection companies, they wouldn't sell the debt to the collection companies, but they'd hire them to be like, hey, get this. And the collection companies are making these phone calls and just like hounding people, like those calls that we all get, right? And then when that didn't work, they would send them to us. So, these were not easy debts to collect, right? It wasn't like, someone sat that bill on their counter and just didn't get around to paying it, and you had to make a phone call and remind them, kind of a deal, right? Like that wasn't where we were at in the process. So that had already been tried by somebody else. So, we kind of took the approach of, we're not going to mess around and waste time picking up the phone and calling you, right? Because people don't answer, or, they might try and avoid you or whatever. Our approach was, we're going straight to a lawsuit, and we're going to try and, freak them out, so to speak, and get them to call us, right? Because they're going to get sued, and your name is, my name's sitting there at the top of the summons and the complaint. And, what we were hoping would happen with all of these is that they would call me.
Gotcha. So it was almost like an intimidation tactic to get people to communicate with you.
Yeah, exactly.
So just to clarify, the hospitals or healthcare providers would hire a debt collection agency that would make the calls for them. And if they couldn't get through to the person that owed the bills, then it would come back to your firm, and you guys would just immediately file the lawsuit in attempts to get the consumer to, I guess, engage in a conversation and try to settle it somehow, right?
Yep. Exactly. I mean, and sometimes they're not going to engage with us anyway. Like, it wasn't just to get them to engage with us. That was certainly what we were hoping would happen most of the time. But if they didn't, we were going through getting a default or summary judgment.
Gotcha. So how often would they respond to your lawsuit?
More often than not, someone would call. It was usually some kind of story about how they can't pay anything, which we usually weren't going to drop it for nothing unless there was some kind of proof that this person's definitely not going to be able to pay. We didn't just take people's word for it, so to speak, I guess,
Yeah, that makes sense. So what circumstances would the law firm drop the medical debt collection case? What did the consumer have to prove in order for your firm to drop the case and say, we won't worry about collecting on this one?
Yeah, well, the kind of debts that I was dealing with, since it was medical debt, I mean, usually if we were dropping it, it was probably like this person is dead, right? Like they're deceased, and it was clear from research or whatever that the estate didn't have any money. When it comes to medical debts, especially, you encounter this, right? Like somebody's very sick and they're in a nursing home or they're in a hospital or whatever, and you're trying to collect these debts, and then they pass away, and it's like, well, how do you get the money now? Well, if they had money, if they had assets, maybe if they had a home or something, you can collect those, but we can't go after like their daughter, for example. And a lot of times that would be the person that might call as the daughter. And I know, I'm sitting there knowing I can't get money from her, but, people were funny about their parents' money. A lot of times they were like, nope, this house was passed down to me. And, so if it was, well, this person has passed away and there was nothing and we can, verify that, then a lot of times we would drop it. But, a lot of times these people were, well, I'm living in mom's home now. And, we would say that home doesn't belong to you yet, kind of a deal, that kind of stuff.
What does that process look like if someone is sued for medical debt and then they pass away and their assets are passed on to family members? What do you have to do as a medical debt collector to, I guess, seize those properties and collect on that?
Yeah, technically those properties don't belong to the children when the parents die, right? And we're getting into like wills and estates kind of stuff here, but like that stuff passes to the estate, and then the estate has to go through probate, so to speak, and basically all the debts of the estate have to be paid before heirs or the children get that stuff. So a lot of times we're doing those kind of fights, and we're forcing people into probate court and things like that to make sure that we get paid before they get paid.
So like if a person inherited their parents' house and there was medical debt that the parent owed before they passed, if the child wanted to sell the house, they would probably have to give a portion of it to the healthcare provider before they can sell the full amount, right?
Yeah, and a lot of times what we would do is, we would make settlements with them where they were like, well, we're working on selling the house, but we don't have the money right now. Like the only asset is the house. And so we'd make a deal with them. When the house sells, you'll pay this amount of money. The other thing that we would do is we'd put liens on these homes, right? So, and this can be like the long game for a collector, is they'll put a lien on the home and then we just sit and wait. And, one day you get a call from a title company who says, hey, this house is being sold and you've got a lien on it. We just want to verify some details. And then we'd get a check in the mail when the house is sold, because the proceeds from the sale are coming to us before they're going to the seller.
Gotcha. So that's typically what a lien looks like in a debt collection case.
Yeah. And we would wait years sometimes for those. We'd get the judgment, we'd do the lien, and like, honestly, as a collection attorney, you'd kind of forget about these. And then one day you get a call and they're like, oh, we got a check for $30,000 for you.
It almost sounds like passive income to me.
It doesn't feel very passive when you're on the collection side, right? Like it's passive, but you've got so much work to do.
Yeah.
And I think this is, a lot of people who are going through debt collection, they panic and they're just like, well, can they put a lien on my home, or can they just garnish my wages? And like, yes, they can. But there's a lot of work that goes into you. I can't just send your employer a letter and say, send me the garnished wages, right? I've got to go through this whole court process first, which takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of different filings, unless the person who is the defendant, the debtor, doesn't do anything, right? So it's like, oh, if I can just file the complaint, serve the summons, get the default judgment, I can do this really quick, and then it can be more passive. But if the person is filing an answer and I've got to go through this discovery and I've got to go to a trial, maybe file a motion for summary judgment, now it's a lot of work for a collector. On those ones, those are the ones where we're maybe giving better settlement deals, because I'm taking into account how much time I'm going to have to spend on this case when somebody files an answer.
So it sounds like if someone has been sued for debt and they file an answer, then the law firm will probably take into account how long the legal battle may end up being, and they may be more likely to settle for less if an answer has been filed. Would you agree with that?
I would agree, with the caveat that every case is a little bit different, right? So that's certainly no guarantee. But the way that I try and describe it to people and the way I teach it to people is, if you're trying to get a settlement, you're trying to create leverage in your negotiations. And how are you going to get leverage? Well, one thing you can do is show the attorney on the other side that he or she is going to have to spend a lot of time on your case. If I don't file an answer and I just call them up, they may say, let's just wait a couple weeks and see if they fail to file an answer, and then I can just get a default judgment, right? But if you file that answer, they know, okay, we're now gonna have to go through this whole court process. It's probably 6 to 8 months, if not more, for me to get to a trial. Best case scenario, I'm filing a motion for summary judgment, which is gonna take me some time to do. And so now I'm thinking, well, can I just get rid of this fast, even if I take less money, right? Because attorneys get busy and overwhelmed, especially collection attorneys, because you've got to have so much work in order for your firm to be profitable. So yeah, it's not always true that you'll get a better deal if you file an answer, but I think a lot of times that's true because you're creating a little bit of leverage for yourself in those negotiations.
Perfect. I think that was a perfect answer and very well said. Thanks for explaining. My next question is, why did you decide to switch from, the collection side to consumer rights side?
I mean, I didn't like doing collections. You're taking money from people that don't have a lot of money to start with, right? Someone that's in a difficult situation and you're putting them in an even more difficult situation. Even though it's owed, I just didn't like doing that. I think the other thing is, from an attorney's point of view, when you're doing litigation, I do medical malpractice, right? And this is an area of law that's very complicated, and you can use a lot of creativity and strategy in those kinds of cases. There's no creativity or strategy in a collections case. It's turning through paperwork. From an attorney's point of view, I never found it very rewarding or fulfilling. You read these statistics about the number of debt collection cases there are. It's by far the most common type of legal case. And most of the defendants do not have attorneys. So if you're thinking like, well, most people that go to court have an attorney, actually that's not true. Most people that go to court do not have an attorney because most of the people that go to court are debt collection debtors, right? And so I'm thinking, how can I help these people? And it's not as simple as just do a debt collection defense law firm. People can't afford to do that. And there's a lot of courts in Utah, they have a program here where if you've got a hearing for a debt collection case, you'll have a volunteer attorney, and I volunteered at those, but that was like a temporary thing. Like we'd help them just for that hearing, and then they were on their own again, 5 minutes after the hearing. And so I just came up with this idea of, well, if I can teach people how to do it, that's going to be such a valuable service to them. And it just became this like really rewarding thing for me, is helping people navigate the process. Now, some people say, well, these people owe money, right? You should just pay your bills. I'm sure you guys get a lot of comments on your like YouTube videos and things, because I do too. Like people are just like, tell people to pay their bills, and I don't see it that way. I see it as, we've got this court process here. Everybody deserves to have a fair shake in that court process. And I tell people that I meet with, there's nothing that I can teach you that is guaranteed to get you out of paying your debts. But I can teach you how the process works, how the game works, so that you can get the best result. And I think too, that when the debtor participates, it's good for the creditors as well. I think it's less work for them. If you reach a settlement with a creditor, they're obviously taking an amount of money that they think is fair. So I don't see it as I'm helping people getting out of paying their debts. I see it as I'm helping people navigate this process so that they get a fair result in the end.